what's up, guys? Welcome back to another video. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another video. Anyways, in this video, I want to talk about boss mules and how to complete them faster. So I'm sure there are many people watching who maybe they're starting boss mules, or maybe they have a lot of boss mules like I do, right? And they are spending way too much time on these things. It takes so long to kill the bosses. And I want to show you guys the way that I clear the bosses, the things that I think of, and the things that I do to clear them much faster. Because if you do what I do, you will clear your boss mules much faster and it won't be as much of a chore. I know a lot of people who boss mules are just a big chore to them. Of course, we all recognize how much money you can get from these characters, but when you have a lot of them, it becomes a big chore. You could spend hours a week doing them when sometimes you just want to grind on your main. And if you don't do them, you feel bad because you got FOMO and all this stuff. So I want to tell you guys all the things that I think of, all the things that I do to make them faster and to make them less miserable. And if you have no idea what boss mules are, to keep it super simple, not only will I have boss mule funding guides linked below, essentially they're just side characters on your account that you can use to kill bosses, and you sell the boss crystal to get a bunch of mesos that you can transfer and put wherever you want. And you could get other resources too, like MVPs. So first we're going to start with a regular normal Lotus and Damien boss mule, like on the lower end one. And then we're going to go up to a much stronger boss mule, like a C10 boss mule, and talk about how to make these boss mules much faster and what you can do to save a lot of time. So I'm on my Nightwalker here. It's at 5.6 million combat power. So it's a pretty good normal Lotus and Damien mule. I would say like this is definitely a funded normal Lotus and Damien mule at level 220. I have really good nodes, and obviously I have a bunch of Legion, right? So the first thing that you want to do, and this goes for all boss mules, is you want to prepare. There's a lot of damage that you can get just if you prepare instead of just hopping on the character and immediately running into bosses. So the first thing that I always check is I make sure that the Legion pages are correct. So this is my general bossing page, and since Nightwalker uses luck, I'm going to switch the inner areas to luck and attack because that's what I use. Just doing this alone will help out a lot. Like I just went from 5.5 to 6.4 mil CP, gained almost 1 mil CP, just making sure my Legion was correct. I would also want to make sure my hyper stats are optimized for what I'm trying to do. So for example, this hyper stat page is actually not 100% optimized. So I would want to reset it and fix it to be something that's more catered towards Lotus and Damien. So when I'm thinking about my hyper stats on my mules, there's two things that I always want to check and make sure that they are sorted out properly. I want to make sure that my boss mule is at 100% crit rate, and I want to make sure that the IED is good enough for the bosses. Now, by good enough for the bosses, it's very dependent on what class you play. So typically for Lotus and Damien, you would want to aim for around like 96% ignore defense to do pretty good damage. Obviously, give or take depending on what class you play. So for Nightwalker, there's some hidden IED that doesn't show up on the stat from one of the passives. I believe it's from this one. You get IED per stack, and then you have a bunch of previous versions. I think that's how that works. But regardless, you have an IED passive that doesn't show in the stat. So having a little less than 96 could be fine for Nightwalker in particular, and this could be the case for a bunch of different classes. So this is where class knowledge actually helps a lot in terms of optimizing for damage for these boss mules. So you can see here that I'm at 92% crit rate. So the thing is with that, it goes into the next part that I want to talk about is making sure you have the right buffs, but we'll talk about this a little bit more. So I would highly recommend getting Saram's Elixir. If you don't know how to get it, it's from the light bulb and it'll be a level 200 quest line. I believe it's this one, Collector's Request. It takes like no time at all, like 5 minutes or something. And you would get access to buying these Saram's Elixirs from the collector in any town. And this gives you a tremendous amount of damage. 10% attack, 50 flat attack, 10 boss, 16 crit damage, and 20% crit rate. So even though I'm at 92% crit rate, I know that when I use the Saram's Elixir, it'll put me at over 100, which is exactly what I want. So I actually have too much here and I don't need this. So let's make a different hyperstat page. I'm already at 87% crit rate. With the Saram's Elixir, it'll put me at 100, so don't have to worry about that. I'm at 92.57% IED. So this is where the buffs also come into play. You need to ask yourself, what kind of buffs do you have access to that you can use every single week? Do you have any familiars? Getting some common familiars on your boss mules could help a lot. For example, on my Ice Lightning, because this class doesn't have as much IED, I went out of my way and opened a bunch of common fams, and got an attack ignore 15% IED fam. And just this IED fam helps a lot, to be honest with you. So you can also do that to help out your boss mules with their IED or any character in general. Getting a bunch of common fams isn't that difficult. You should have like a bunch of them. If you have at least one character that's above level 260, you should be able to have access to getting a bunch of common familiars. Another thing that helps out with IED and a lot of other stats is to make sure that you accept the event on your boss mules. Now, obviously not all events are available at all times in the year, but if they are available, make sure you accept the event buffs and they show up whether it's on your beginner tab or on the top right, because these bonus stats give you a ton of damage as well. They could sort out your crit rate if you need it. They could give you the IED, more boss, all that stuff, and it'll make you way stronger. So make sure you always accept any event buffs as well on your boss mules. So let's just make sure that all of the IED sources are correct. Like we have it from our Legion. The other thing that we could do to get a little bit more IED is you could get it from the event shop. So event shops usually have VIP boosters. Now these aren't available 24/7 throughout the year, but most of the time they are available. So if you're struggling, you could buy one of these and it gives you a lot of extra damage, but I don't 100% recommend it all the time. The reason I don't 100% recommend it all the time is because depending on where you are in your progression, these event resources could be better used on other stuff. So somebody like me, I don't really need extreme growth potions and stuff like that. So I could buy these and I'd be fine. But I would say for most people, you would want to prioritize the other stuff from the event shops than getting a VIP buff. But I just want to throw that out there because it does give you IED and it could be helpful. So the first thing that I always like to do is I like to put in 5 points and see where I'm at. The reason why I put in 5 points is because 5 points is really cheap and it lets me see how high I want to get to. So I'm just going to try and get it to like 94 and then call it there. So there you go, 94.1. I think that's good enough. And then the next is I always want to put 10 in crit damage, 10 in boss, and 10 in regular damage. And the reason why you put 10 in each is not only because it's really simple, you probably could hyper optimize a little bit more with one being 11 and one being like level 8 or something, but it just makes it really simple to understand and makes the numbers work out a lot easier. So I usually recommend putting 10 to 10 in these three, and then the IED one is the one that you fluctuate. Now some classes might need more in IED, and if you need more in IED, then I would remove from regular damage and put into IED. Then if you have any extra points, you always put into attack, and then anything after that into your stat, and then your secondary stat if you have it. So now I'm at 6.5 mil CP, so I've gained like a little bit more damage because I optimized a little bit more. Now the next thing that I want to mention that will help a lot is your buffs. So there's a lot of buffs that you can get pretty much for free that will dramatically increase how much damage that you do. So first of all, Monster Park Extreme Red and Extreme Green Potion. You could use the blue potion if you're a mage. You should be doing Monster Park every day just in your regular progression, so you would be able to afford getting these on your boss mules. Serum's Elixir, which we talked about earlier, this is super useful, and usually I get like 2 of them so that I could do all of my bosses in 30 minutes or less. Another thing is I would highly recommend joining a guild, because guilds have this guild atmospheric buff that you can get every single week, and it gives you another 30 attack, which stacks with everything. So far we've gotten ourselves another bonus 60 attack, a stage of attack speed, which is huge. Attack speed is an insane amount, and all of the Serum Elixir damage. Another thing is if you join a guild, that you probably will have access to guild skills. Now different guilds have different restrictions on whether or not you can use guild skills, but you should try and look for a mule guild. A mule guild will probably have at least 1 or 2 guild skills that you can use. And these guild skills give you a ton of damage, 30 crit damage, 30 damage, 30 boss. So you can use these as well to make your boss runs way faster. Another thing that you could do to get even more damage is by buying a Legion Might coupon from the Legion shop. Now keep in mind that these Legion coupons can get pretty expensive if you buy them on all of your mules every single week, every single time. But if you have a lot of Legion and a lot of coins, then sure, why not? Get it. And it'll make your run quite a bit faster with all these things combined. And then the last thing is you would always want to make sure to fame someone, because if you fame someone, then that gives you an extra 50 attack if you fame someone on a 275 chair, and that you could get that every single week for free. So go to a channel that has people sitting on it, whether it's channel 1 or whatever channel it is, make sure you fame people. So all of these things combined will make you do your bosses way faster. So that's the first thing that I want to mention, is preparing your buffs, preparing your hyper stats, your Legion, all that stuff. You want to make sure it's all optimized so that you're doing as much damage as possible. Don't be like like this guy wasting his time making his own food. You gotta get back to getting gains on MapleStory. If you spend an hour a day making yourself food, you would be missing out on around 4.5 billion messes a week and like 200 fragments. That's why I partnered up with Factor to give you guys fresh, never frozen, gourmet meals straight to your door. I've tried it out myself and the food is unironically good and takes only 2 minutes to be ready. My community loves it too. So stop being dumb and wasting all your mesos and get Factor using my link below to get 50% off your first box and free shipping. Thank you guys so much for supporting me, and thank you Factor for sponsoring, and enjoy the rest of the video. The next part to killing bosses much faster is you're gonna have to learn how to play your class properly. Now, I know this sounds very obvious, but you would not believe how much damage you can gain if you just learn how to play your class properly. You know how to burst properly on it, you know how to DPS, you know all the combos if it's a more complicated class, you know what buffs to press in what order. These things will make your damage increase a stupid amount without having to get any gear upgrades. Part of the reason why I could do my boss moves so quickly is because I play the classes very optimally. And not only that, I know how to do the bosses optimally as well. Like I know the boss patterns and stuff like that. So what that means is I would highly recommend joining your class Discord. So if you're a Nightwalker, like in this example, join the Nightwalker Discord. Look at the FAQ, for example. Maybe ask a few questions. Maybe try to find some videos on the class. Do just a little bit of research and you would be surprised how much damage you can get just from learning how to play your class a little bit better. Same thing on YouTube. You could just look up a class guide, maybe learn something that you didn't know already. I myself have a Nightwalker bursting guide, which I think is really good, and plan to make more guides for more classes in the future. But just familiarizing yourself with what your class does will increase your damage dramatically. And another pro tip that will really help is if you get pets. Now, obviously, it'll cost you some money to get pet buffs, but getting pet buffs will definitely make things a lot more convenient. You could get free pets every month from the reward shop, but the pet buff you would have to pay for. And obviously, not everybody wants to do that. I totally understand, but it definitely just makes things more convenient. One last thing for the preparation is you want to make sure that you have the right link skills. So try to always do your boss moves with link skills. I know it could be a little bit annoying because of link skill transfer costs, but in the future, it's going to be unlimited link skill transfers. So make sure you have link skills on. Another buff that you could get is Hero's Echo or exclusive buff, whatever it's called, depending on what class you have. But this buff, you can get it usually from doing your story, or if you're an explorer, you have to go to Orbis Tower floor 9, I think, and talk to the fairy, and you could get it. It gives you another 4% attack and magic attack. All of these things combined will give you a lot of damage. So now that we know about preparing buffs, we know about playing your class properly, all of these things, this is all preparation to do the bosses. Let's talk about what bosses you should do in what order and why. So in the planner, you can set up all your bosses here, right? If you just press this and then you check all the bosses that you want to do. And this is great to do, but you shouldn't just do all the bosses in order. You shouldn't just go from like Zac, Magnus, Hilla, Pap, etc. The reason for that is because you want to optimize the bosses based off of your cooldowns. So when you have everything up, all of your burst and everything, you should go do a tankier boss like Lotus, Damien, Vellum, Papulatus, stuff like that, because you're not going to need your burst for the weaker bosses. So I'm going to go do my burst on Lotus, but when my burst is on cooldown, I'm going to go do something like Hilla or something like Cygnus, because those bosses don't need my burst. I could just kill them with regular DPS. Whereas if I went and finished Lotus and my burst is on cooldown, and then I immediately enter Damien, Damien's going to take so much longer because I have to wait for my burst within Damien. So you want to optimize your pathing based off of your burst cooldowns. And this is even more important on classes that have a 3-minute burst cooldown like Nightwalker. And this is also why classes that have 1-minute burst, 2-minute bursts are even better for boss mules, because you can just burst even more often, which means you could run through the bosses quicker. So I'm going to kill Lotus real quick, and then we'll look at my cooldowns and see where it's at. So I just use my burst to get out of Lotus here. And now I know that I don't have any burst remaining. So I'm going to go do some bosses that I know also don't have a lot of HP. I actually do have a little bit of residual burst because my spears are still up. So I'm going to do a boss like Magnus that isn't that tanky with my residual burst. See, I was able to kill Magnus still pretty quickly because I had some residual burst. And a lot of classes are like this, where you can use your big part of your burst, which is usually like the beginning part of it, and then you have a little bit left over. Like, for example, on Mercedes, you have your spirits as well, where after Kala's Wrath, you still have your spirits up and you could do a bit of damage. But now that my spears are down, which is like a huge part of my damage, now I really have nothing. So I go do a boss like Hilla, because a boss like Hilla is super squishy and I could just kill it with nothing. I could just kill it with like my basic attacks, and it'll also allow me to spend some time while waiting for my burst to come up. So So instead of just waiting for my burst doing nothing or wasting my time in a boss that I could burst down, I go kill the weaker boss. I see on my cooldowns there's still like a minute left for my burst to come up, so I'm gonna go do something like Cygnus as well, which is another much weaker boss that I don't really need a lot of my cooldowns for. And now I could see that my burst is about to come up. So because my burst is about to come up, I'm gonna go do a boss like Papulatus, for example, which is a lot tankier. Papulatus even has like a few seconds for him to spawn in, which I can also use to my advantage to make sure that I'm not wasting any time. So by the time he spawns in, I'm fully buffed up for my burst and I'm able to kill him within my burst. And then I'm just going to do the exact same thing. I'm just going to go look for a boss that I can kill with my residual burst, because I still have my spears up, which is a big part of my damage on Nightwalker. And then once the spears go down, I'm going to go look for a really squishy boss that I wouldn't really benefit that much from having spears on or off for, that I could just kill regardless. So Queen is a really good boss to do with residual burst, because Queen isn't too tanky, but it also is tanky enough that like you definitely don't want to just do it with just like your regular DPS, because it's a little annoying to do. So now I see that my spears are about to run out, and because my spears are about to run out, which is my residual burst, I'm going to go look for a boss that's really squishy to kill, like Zac, for example. So if you follow this method, you will get through your bosses much faster, but it requires a bit of game knowledge. You have to know your boss cooldowns. You have to know which bosses are squishy, which ones are tanky, and what the boss mechanics are for every single boss, because that way you could optimize around it. But you can see how I ran through these bosses much faster. Instead of just doing my burst on Lotus, then waiting for my burst to come up again to do Pap or something like that, or immediately going into Damien right after and having no burst. That stuff isn't good. You would want to optimize around your cooldowns and you'll save a lot of time that way. Now that's all really good for normal Lotus and Damien boss meals, because if you're funding a normal Lotus and Damien boss meal, it shouldn't take more than 30 minutes. It should usually take less than 30 minutes to do the boss meal. But what about like a C10 boss meal? What about a character that's much stronger and is able to do bosses that are way tankier, like Chaos Tenebris and stuff like that? How do I make these boss meals faster? So the thing with these types of boss meals is everything that we just talked about is even more important. So for example, getting all the buffs that you need to do these bosses is even more crucial, because now everything is scaled up much more. The amount of difference that you can get from having buffs and not having buffs is astronomically bigger when it comes to tankier bosses. Stuff like being in a guild, yeah, you definitely want to be in a guild with G skills. It's going to make a huge difference for these bosses. Learning how to play your class, yes, this is like mandatory. For Lotus and Damien boss meals, you could get away with like subpar gameplay and not exactly knowing what to do, because these bosses are very forgiving. But if you're trying to do stuff like Darknell or Vihilla, if you don't know what you're doing, or if you don't know what the boss mechanics are, it's going to be way harder for you to clear these things, and you're gonna have to fund them to like 150 mil CP or even more just so you feel comfortable to kill the bosses. The preparation is all the same too. You really want to make sure that your hyper stats are optimized. You really want to make sure your Legion page is optimized as well. You want to make sure that all of your link skills are on. All of these things become absolutely mandatory, and you want to get as many buffs as possible. So remember how previously I said I wouldn't really recommend getting VIP buffs for like normal Lotus Damien boss meals? I think for C10 boss meals, you definitely should get a VIP buff. And to be honest with you, if your account is at the point in progression where you do have C10 boss meals, then you probably don't need like extreme growth potions or a bunch of other low level Legion, low level account resources. You could probably justify spending on these as well. But when it comes to Chaos Tenebris boss meals, the most important thing that you want to do is you want to use all of your buffs for Vihilla and Darknell. These two bosses in particular are the most tanky. So Vihilla has the most HP out of all the bosses that you do, and Darknell is the highest level one. So if you're not really high level, like 270 or higher, you're not going to have all of your bonus level damage on the boss. So you want to make sure that you have all of your buffs for these bosses. In particular, you want to use your guild skills for these bosses. If you're able to kill them within one set of G skills like Vihilla and Darknell within one set of G skills like 15 minutes and 15 minutes, then yeah, your boss meal is really strong and you're doing a good job. But let's just say it takes the 30 minutes just to do Vihilla, right? Like you're doing a low damage C10 boss meal, then the same thing applies as before, where you would do Vihilla with your G skills, and then you would spend the next 30 minutes doing bosses that you might not necessarily need G skills for, like Will or Hard Lotus and Hard Damien, where like you can get away with not having G skills on them because they don't have as much HP. And then by the time you kill them, your G skills will be up again so that you could finish doing Dark now with G skills. So it's the exact same thing. You just want to plan around which bosses are tankier. Vihilla and Dark Knight are the two tankiest ones, so you want to always make sure you have G skills and all of your buffs for them. Another thing that's also super important for these bosses is previously I said it would be beneficial if you guys learn the boss mechanics and it would make things easier for you. These bosses, it's mandatory. Like, you definitely have to have a really good understanding of the boss mechanics if you're going to do a C10 boss meal. Because let's say you're kind of new to the game and you die out in like Von Bon. Oh, I can't imagine doing that. I've definitely never died out in Von Bon before. It's not that big of a deal because you could just immediately enter the boss and try again right away, and it doesn't take that long. But let's say you die out in Darknell and there's like 10% HP left. That is a way bigger hit to your time for doing a C10 boss meal, because the boss takes a long time and it requires a lot more effort. So it's way more exhausting if you die out in these bosses. So I would highly recommend looking up boss guides. I have my own boss guides for Darknell, Vihilla, Will, a bunch of really hard bosses. I would highly recommend watching them because it'll help you so much in terms of boss clear speed and doing your boss meals. So essentially, don't skip out on buffs when it comes to C10 boss meals, and really make sure you know how to play your class and how to do these bosses. Those three things will make these boss meals way easier. I also recommend getting 3 familiar slots, like getting HP fams for Vihilla and even just 3 IED fams. These things will help a lot. Now, obviously, now that we reached the end of the video, you could just overfund your characters and disregard everything that I said and just one-shot the boss. Hey, you could do that if you want. But if you're not that type of person and you want to clear the bosses just more effectively with the current amount of gear that you have, then I think this is a great video for you to listen to and to try things out on. Obviously, if you have any questions or any additional tips for how to clear your boss meals much faster, definitely leave a comment below. Let's all try to help each other out. I appreciate you guys and this community a lot. I do read all of the comments too. And if this video helped you out, make sure to subscribe because it helps me out so much. And come to the Twitch channel. It also helps me out a lot. So I really appreciate that. With that all being said though, if you got to the very end of this video, the very end, I want you to say the word sprinkle. I want you to say the word sprinkle like Lara's main attacking skill, so I know that you watched it all the way to the end and you're the GOAT. Anyways, with that all being said, I appreciate you guys for watching and have a wonderful day. Shout out to my members: Blazefire, Shooms, Shagad, Ravi Espa, Koga, Skittles, Dante Victory, CK, Jay, Kyle, Vampiric X, Fresh and Juicy, Assassin, Henzo, Henrique, and Kelvin. I appreciate you guys so much, and thank you everybody who submitted fan art. You can always submit it in the Discord and it'll be put at the end of every video. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day.